In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Manor, a scream pierces the night. Dr. Henry Wilcox lies dead, a silver candlestick stained with blood. Who struck the fatal blow in this house of secrets? Was it the charming solicitor hiding a fortune's theft? The protective father desperate to save his daughter's future? Or the icy widow who knows more than she says? As whispers of ghosts and greed haunt the estate, Miss Jane Marple's keen mind unravels a web of lies, where every clue, ink-stained fingers, a burned letter, a whiff of tobacco, leads to a shocking truth. Will you unravel the mystery before the killer strikes again? Chapter 1. The Invitation to Blackthorn Manor. In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, where the hedgerows bloomed with the last of summer's roses, Miss Jane Marple sat in her neat parlour, her knitting needles clicking softly. The late afternoon sun cast golden patterns through the lace curtains, and a pot of Earl Grey steamed gently on the table. It was a scene of perfect tranquillity, yet Miss Marple's sharp blue eyes, peering over her spectacles, betrayed a mind ever alert to the undercurrents of human nature. The post had arrived that morning, bringing with it an unexpected letter. It was written in a precise, elegant hand on heavy cream paper, sealed with a wax crest that bore the insignia of a thorn-wrapped heart. The letter was from Lady Beatrice Ashford, an old acquaintance from Miss Marple's school days, now widowed and residing at Blackthorn Manor, a sprawling estate some miles from St. Mary Mead. The invitation was polite but urgent. Lady Beatrice requested Miss Marple's presence for a weekend gathering, hinting at a matter of some delicacy that required her particular insight. Miss Marple, never one to ignore a friend's distress, had accepted at once. Now, as she packed a small valise with her usual efficiency, she pondered the tone of the letter. Beatrice had always been a woman of poise, yet the words had carried a tremor of unease. Something is amiss, Miss Marple murmured to herself, folding a lavender-scented shawl. And where there is unease, there is often mischief. The journey to Blackthorn Manor was uneventful, save for the beauty of the autumn countryside. The train rattled past fields of golden stubble and woods ablaze with crimson and amber. By early evening, Miss Marple arrived at the manor's gates, where a chauffeur in a dark uniform awaited her. The manor itself was a Gothic pile, its turrets and ivy-clad walls looming against the twilight sky. The air carried the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, and a faint chill seemed to linger, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Inside, the great hall was a study in faded grandeur. A chandelier glittered dimly above a polished oak staircase, and portraits of stern Ashfords gazed down with unyielding eyes. Lady Beatrice greeted Miss Marple with warmth, though her face was pale, and her hands trembled slightly as she clasped Miss Marple's own. "My dear Jane," she said, her voice low, "I am so grateful you've come. I fear this house is not what it seems." The other guests were already assembled in the drawing-room, a cavernous space warmed by a roaring fire. Miss Marple's keen gaze took them in one by one, noting their postures, their glances, the subtle tensions in their smiles. There was Sir Reginald Ashford, Beatrice's brother-in-law, a retired colonel with a brusque manner and a habit of tapping his cane. His daughter Clara, a strikingly beautiful young woman, seemed restless, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting someone. Dr. Henry Wilcox, the family physician, was a quiet man with a scholarly air, his fingers stained faintly with ink. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, a distant cousin, wore an air of haughty disdain, her emerald necklace catching the firelight. Lastly, there was young Mr. Lawrence Trent, a solicitor and Beatrice's financial adviser, whose polished charm did not quite conceal a certain nervous energy. Dinner was a formal affair, served by silent footmen in a dining room lined with tapestries. The conversation was polite but strained, touching on the weather, the state of the estate, and vague reminiscences of better days. Miss Marple, as was her habit, said little but listened much. She noted how Clara avoided her father's gaze, how Dr. Wilcox seemed preoccupied with his wine, and how Mrs. Carver's sharp remarks drew tight smiles from the others. Lawrence Trent, meanwhile, spoke with practised ease, yet his eyes lingered on Beatrice with an intensity that Miss Marple found curious. As the meal drew to a close, Lady Beatrice rose, her face pale. "I must speak plainly," she said, her voice trembling. "There have been incidents in this house. Objects moved, letters misplaced, and whispers of things that cannot be explained. I fear we are not alone here." A silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Sir Reginald snorted, dismissing the notion as womanly nonsense, but Clara's face grew paler still, and Dr. Wilcox's hand tightened on his glass. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, her mind already sifting through the possibilities. A haunted manor, she thought, was rarely haunted by ghosts, but by secrets, oh yes, always by secrets. That night, as Miss Marple retired to her room, she sat by the window, gazing out at the moonlit gardens. The manor was a closed circle, its inhabitants bound by ties of blood, duty, and hidden motives. She had seen such circles before, and she knew that within them truth was often buried deep, but not so deep that her little grey cells could not uncover it. Chapter 2. The Shadow in the Night. The clock in Blackthorn Manor's great hall struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent corridors like a warning. Miss Jane Marple, tucked beneath the crisp linens of her four-poster bed, was not asleep. Her eyes, sharp as ever, stared into the darkness, her mind turning over the evening's observations. The unease in Lady Beatrice's voice, the fleeting glances among the guests, the undercurrent of tension that no amount of polite conversation could mask. These were the threads of a tapestry she had yet to unravel. She had just closed her eyes when a sound, faint but unmistakable, reached her ears. A soft thud, followed by the creak of a floorboard. Miss Marple sat up, her senses alert. The manor was old, prone to the groans and sighs of ancient wood. But this was no ordinary settling. It was deliberate, cautious, the sound of someone moving with purpose in the dead of night. Slipping on her dressing gown, Miss Marple lit the bedside candle and moved silently to the door. The corridor was a cavern of shadows, the flickering light casting eerie patterns on the panelled walls. She paused, listening. The sound came again, a muffled step, then a faint rustle, as if someone had brushed against fabric or paper. It seemed to originate from the direction of the library, a room Lady Beatrice had mentioned as her late husband's sanctuary. Miss Marple, ever prudent, hesitated only a moment before proceeding. Her slippers made no sound on the thick carpet as she glided down the hallway. Her candle, a small beacon in the gloom. The library door was ajar, a sliver of moonlight spilling through the gap. She peered inside and saw nothing but rows of leather-bound books, and the faint gleam of a brass candelabrum on the desk, yet the air felt charged, as if the room held its breath. Then a shadow moved. It was brief, a flicker at the edge of her vision, but enough to confirm her suspicion. Someone had been here, and they had not wished to be seen. Stepping inside, Miss Marple's keen eyes scanned the room. The desk was in disarray, papers scattered, a quill pen askew, a drawer slightly open. She approached, noting a faint smudge of ink on the blotter still wet. Someone had been writing, or searching, in haste. Before she could investigate further, a scream shattered the silence, high and piercing, from somewhere upstairs. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her composure remained. She hurried back to the corridor, where doors were opening and voices called out in alarm. By the time she reached the source, a guest bedroom on the second floor, a small crowd had gathered. Clara Ashford stood in the doorway, her face ashen, her nightgown clutched tightly about her. "It's Dr. Wilcox!" she cried, her voice trembling. He's dead!" Miss Marple stepped into the room, her candle casting a soft glow over the scene. Dr. Henry Wilcox lay sprawled across the floor, his eyes wide and lifeless, a thin trickle of blood seeping from a wound at his temple. A heavy silver candlestick lay nearby, its base stained with crimson. The window was open, the curtains fluttering in the night breeze, and a faint smell of tobacco lingered in the air. Lady Beatrice, arriving in a flurry of lace and distress, gasped and clutched Miss Marple's arm. "Oh, Jane, what has happened? Who could do such a thing?" Sir Reginald, his face thunderous, pushed past the others. "Murder! That's what! The man's been struck down!" He bent to examine the body, then straightened, his cane tapping angrily. "We must send for the police at once." Mrs. Evelyn Carver, her emerald necklace now replaced by a silk robe, stood at the edge of the group, her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is monstrous," she said, her voice cold. "Who was in this room last?" Lawrence Trent, his hair dishevelled but his manner calm, shook his head. "I was in my room all night. I heard nothing until Clara screamed." Miss Marple's eyes moved from face to face, noting the shock, the fear, the calculation. Clara's hands trembled, but her eyes were dry. Sir Reginald's bluster seemed to mask a deeper unease. Mrs. Carver's composure was almost too perfect, and Mr. Trent's quick denial struck her as rehearsed. She knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene, and observed the position of the candlestick, the angle of the wound, the faint scuff marks on the floor near the window. "The police will come," she said quietly, rising. "But first we must secure this room. Nothing must be touched." Lady Beatrice nodded, her face pale but resolute. "Jane, you've seen such things before. Will you help us?" Miss Marple's lips curved into a small, determined smile. "Of course, my dear Beatrice, I shall do what I can." As the household dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her mind already at work. The candlestick was heavy, but not so heavy that a woman could not wield it. The window suggested a possible escape, yet the scuff marks were too deliberate, as if meant to be seen. And the ink in the library, had Dr. Wilcox been there, or someone else? She recalled the doctor's preoccupied air at dinner, his ink-stained fingers, his silence when Beatrice spoke of the Manor's incidents. Back in her room, Miss Marple sat at the small writing desk, her candle casting a steady light. She took out a notebook and began to jot down her observations, her neat handwriting filling the page. "Dr. Wilcox struck at approximately midnight," she wrote. Candlestick, window, ink, tobacco. Motives unknown, but secrets abound. Clara's scream genuine or staged, Sir Reginald's anger, defensive or righteous, Mrs. Carver's calm, control or indifference, Mr. Trent's denial. Too swift, she paused, her pen hovering. Blackthorn Manor was a house of shadows, and one of those shadows had struck with deadly intent. But Miss Marple knew that shadows could not hide from her little grey cells. The truth, however elusive, was there, waiting to be uncovered. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, Miss Marple closed her notebook and allowed herself a moment of reflection. A murder had been committed under this roof, and she would not rest until the guilty party was brought to light. The game, as her old friend Hercule Poirot might have said, was afoot. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Inquiry. The morning after Dr. Wilcox's death dawned grey and heavy, with a mist that clung to Blackthorn Manor like a shroud. The household gathered in the dining room, where breakfast was served in near silence, the clink of porcelain and the rustle of napkins the only sounds. Miss Jane Marple, seated at the far end of the table, sipped her tea and observed the strained faces around her. Grief, fear, and suspicion hung in the air, as palpable as the fog outside. Lady Beatrice, her eyes red-rimmed, made a valiant effort to maintain decorum. "The police will be here soon," she announced, her voice wavering only slightly. "Inspector Grayson from the County Constabulary is a thorough man, I'm told. We must all cooperate fully." Sir Reginald snorted, pushing his untouched plate of kedgeree aside. "Thorough or not, the man will need more than plodding to catch a murderer. This is a devilish business, Beatrice." Clara, pale and silent, stared at her teacup, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, impeccable in a charcoal dress, raised an eyebrow. "Let us hope the inspector is not swayed by histrionics," she said, her tone sharp. "We need facts, not theatrics." Lawrence Trent, dabbing his mouth with a napkin, offered a conciliatory smile. "I'm sure we all want the truth, Mrs. Carver, but we must be patient. These things take time." Miss Marple, her expression mild, noted the undercurrents in their words. Sir Reginald's bluster seemed to mask unease. Mrs. Carver's cold precision hinted at a mind already forming its own conclusions. Mr. Trent's smoothness was a carefully constructed facade. Clara's silence, however, was the most intriguing. Her eyes held a flicker of something unspoken, perhaps fear, perhaps guilt. The arrival of Inspector Grayson interrupted her thoughts. He was a sturdy man in his 40s, with a weathered face and a no-nonsense manner. Accompanied by a young constable, he entered the dining room with a brisk nod. "Good morning, Lady Ashford," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss. We'll need to speak with everyone present, and I'd like to see the scene of the crime immediately." Lady Beatrice led the way to Dr. Wilcox's room, where the body still lay, covered now with a sheet. Miss Marple followed at a discreet distance, her presence unassuming, but her senses sharp. The inspector examined the room methodically, noting the candlestick, the open window, and the scuff marks on the floor. "A blunt force blow to the temple," he muttered, crouching beside the body. "Death likely instantaneous. Time of death, I'd wager, between 11 and midnight." Miss Marple, standing near the doorway, tilted her head slightly. "You will note, Inspector," she said softly, "the position of the candlestick. It lies at an astothungal angle, as if dropped rather than placed. And the window, open, yet the curtains are undisturbed. Curious, is it not?" Inspector Grayson glanced at her, his brow furrowing. "And you are Miss Jane Marple," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "A friend of Lady Beatrice, here at her request. I have some small experience in matters of this kind." The inspector's expression softened, though a trace of scepticism remained. "I see. Well, Miss Marple, any observations are welcome, but I'll handle the investigation. Let's have everyone's statements, Constable." The interviews began in the library, where the inspector set up a makeshift office. Miss Marple, permitted to sit quietly in a corner, listened as each member of the household was questioned. Sir Reginald was first, his account gruff but straightforward. He had retired to his room at 10, read for an hour, and heard nothing until Clara's scream. "I keep to myself," he said, tapping his cane. "No use for late-night wanderings." Clara, trembling but composed, claimed she had gone to bed early, troubled by a headache. She had heard a noise, a thud, she thought, around midnight, and fearing for Dr. Wilcox, had gone to his room, where she found him dead. "I screamed because it was so awful," she said, her voice breaking. Mrs. Carver was next, her demeanour icy. She had been in her room, writing letters, and had neither heard nor seen anything unusual. Dr. Wilcox was a competent physician, she said, but hardly a man to inspire murder. "Perhaps you should look to his private affairs, Inspector." Lawrence Trent's statement was polished, almost too perfect. He had been in his room, reviewing estate papers, and had fallen asleep early. "I wish I'd heard something," he said, his tone earnest. "I might have prevented this tragedy." Lady Beatrice, last to be questioned, spoke of her sleepless night, haunted by the Manor's recent disturbances. "I heard nothing specific," she admitted, "but I felt a presence. I cannot explain it." Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly as she listened, her mind cataloguing each statement. The alibis were tidy, almost rehearsed, yet none accounted for the ink smudge she had seen in the library or the faint scent of tobacco in Dr. Wilcox's room. She recalled the doctor's ink-stained fingers at dinner, his distracted air, and wondered what he had been writing or reading before his death. As the inspector dismissed the group, Miss Marple approached him. "Might I suggest, Inspector," she said, "that you examine the library? There is a desk there, with papers in disarray and a fresh ink smudge. It may be relevant." Grayson nodded, though his expression remained guarded. "I'll look into it, Miss Marple." "Thank you." Left alone in the library, Miss Marple examined the desk more closely. The scattered papers included medical notes, a bill for estate repairs, and a half-written letter in Dr. Wilcox's hand, addressed to an unknown recipient. The letter spoke of a grave concern and a need to act swiftly, but it was unfinished, the ink trailing off in a jagged line. She also found a small key, tucked beneath the blotter, its purpose unclear. As she replaced the key, she heard a soft creak behind her. Turning, she saw Clara in the doorway, her face pale. "Miss Marple," she whispered, I need to speak with you." Alone, Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was alert. "Of course, my dear," she said, "let us sit by the fire. There is much to understand, and I believe you may help me." Clara's hesitation, her nervous glance toward the door, told Miss Marple that the girl was on the verge of revealing something, perhaps a truth, perhaps a lie. Either way, it was a thread to follow, and Miss Marple was determined to trace it to its source. Chapter 4. The Weight of Secrets. The library at Blackthorn Manor was a haven of quiet, its shelves heavy with the wisdom of centuries, yet it hummed with the unspoken secrets of the present. Miss Jane Marple sat in a high-backed chair by the fire, her knitting resting lightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on Clara Ashford. The young woman perched on the edge of a velvet settee, her hands twisting her handkerchief into knots, her face a mask of agitation. "You wish to speak, my dear," Miss Marple said gently, her voice as soothing as the crackle of the fire. "There is no need to fear. Whatever you say will be heard with kindness and discretion." Clara's eyes darted to the door, ensuring it was closed before she spoke in a low, trembling voice. "Miss Marple, I wasn't entirely truthful with the inspector. Last night, I did hear something before the thud. Voices, low and urgent, coming from Dr. Wilcox's room. I couldn't make out the words, but one voice was his and the other, I think it was a man's." Miss Marple's needles paused, though her expression remained serene. "And you did not mention this to Inspector Grayson because—" Clara's cheeks flushed. "I was afraid. Father, Sir Reginald, he's so protective, and he's been so angry lately, about the estate, about money. I didn't want to make things worse. And I wasn't sure what I heard. It might have been nothing." "Nothing is rarely nothing, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone mild but her eyes sharp. "Did you recognize the second voice? Or perhaps you saw something when you found Dr. Wilcox?" Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. I thought I saw a shadow move outside the window, just before I screamed, but it was so dark and I was so frightened, I can't be certain." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already sifting through Clara's words. The girl's fear was genuine, but there was a guarded quality to her story, as if she were holding back a piece of the puzzle. "Thank you, Clara," she said. "You have done well to tell me this. Now rest, and say nothing more for the moment." As Clara left, her footsteps soft on the carpet, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her thoughts racing. Voices in the night, a shadow at the window, an unfinished letter in the library. These were not mere fragments, but threads in a larger pattern. She resolved to speak with each member of the household herself, to probe gently but firmly, for she knew that truth often hid in the smallest details. The morning passed in a flurry of police activity. Inspector Grayson and his constable combed the grounds, searching for signs of an intruder, while the household remained confined to the drawing-room under the watchful eye of a second constable. Miss Marple, granted permission to move about as Lady Beatrice's guest, took the opportunity to observe the others. Sir Reginald paced by the window, his cane tapping a restless rhythm. "This is intolerable," he muttered. "A man murdered under our roof, and we're treated like prisoners." Mrs. Evelyn Carver, seated with a book she did not read, glanced up. "Calm yourself, Reginald. Your bluster won't bring Dr. Wilcox back, nor will it clear your name." Sir Reginald's face reddened. "My name? What are you implying, Evelyn?" "Only that you argued with Dr. Wilcox yesterday," she said coolly. "Something about estate funds, wasn't it? Voices were raised." Miss Marple's ears pricked at this, though she kept her eyes on her knitting. Sir Reginald's argument with Dr. Wilcox was news to her, and it added a new layer to the Colonel's brusque demeanour. Lawrence Trent, lounging by the fireplace, interjected smoothly. "Let's not leap to conclusions, Mrs. Carver. We're all under strain. I, for one, had no quarrel with Dr. Wilcox. He was a fine man, always concerned for Lady Beatrice's health." Lady Beatrice, seated nearby, looked up, her face weary. "He was kind," she said softly. "He warned me only last week that I should rest more, that the strain of the manor was too much. I wish I had listened." Miss Marple noted the tremor in Beatrice's voice, the way her hands clasped tightly together. She also observed Trent's quick glance at Beatrice, a flicker of something, concern perhaps, or calculation. The room was a web of tensions, and Miss Marple was determined to untangle it. After luncheon, she sought out Inspector Grayson, who was examining the library desk. "Found anything of interest, Miss Marple?" he asked, his tone more curious than dismissive. "Only questions, Inspector," she replied. "But I wonder if you've noticed the key I found beneath the blotter last night. It is small, perhaps for a lockbox or a private drawer, and the letter Doctor. Wilcox was writing. Its tone suggests he knew something troubling." Grayson nodded, holding up the key, now bagged as evidence. "I saw it. We're searching for what it might open. As for the letter, it's vague, but we'll look into it. Anything else?" Miss Marple hesitated, then said, "The tobacco scent in Dr. Wilcox's room. Does anyone in the household smoke a pipe?" Grayson's brow furrowed. "Not that I've been told. Sir Reginald smokes cigars, but that's a different matter. Why do you ask?" "A small detail," she said, smiling faintly. "But details, Inspector, are the breadcrumbs that lead to truth." Leaving Grayson to his work, Miss Marple made her way to the conservatory, where she found Mrs. Carver tending to a potted orchid. The woman's movements were precise, almost mechanical, and Miss Marple sensed an opportunity. "Mrs. Carver," she began, her voice gentle, "you mentioned an argument between Sir Reginald and Dr. Wilcox. Might I ask what you overheard?" Mrs. Carver's lips tightened, but she did not look up. "It was yesterday afternoon in the study. Reginald was furious about some financial matter. Debts, I believe. Dr. Wilcox was calm, but he said something about irregularities that needed addressing. I didn't linger. It wasn't my business." Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away the word irregularities. "And Dr. Wilcox's role in the household? Was he merely a physician, or did he have other responsibilities?" Mrs. Carver's eyes flicked to Miss Marple, sharp and assessing. "He was trusted with Beatrice's health, and I suspect with certain estate matters. He was nosy, in my opinion, always asking questions." Miss Marple thanked her and withdrew, her thoughts turning to Dr. Wilcox's role. A physician with ink-stained fingers, writing a letter about a grave concern, arguing about estate funds. His death was no random act. Someone in Blackthorn Manor had feared what he knew, and Miss Marple was determined to discover what it was. As evening fell, the mist thickened, cloaking the manor in an eerie hush. Miss Marple sat by her window, her notebook open, her pen moving swiftly. "Voices in the night," she wrote. "A shadow at the window. A key, a letter, tobacco, and an argument about money. Dr. Wilcox knew too much, and someone silenced him. But who, and why?" She closed the notebook, her eyes gleaming with quiet resolve. The truth was close, hidden in the shadows of Blackthorn Manor, and Miss Marple's little grey cells were already at work, piecing together the puzzle. Chapter 5. The Web of Alibis. The mist that cloaked Blackthorn Manor had not lifted by mid-morning, lending the estate an air of secrecy that suited Miss Jane Marple's purpose. She sat in the drawing-room, her knitting a quiet rhythm in her hands, her eyes moving from one guest to another. The household was restless, confined by Inspector Grayson's orders to remain on the premises, and the tension was palpable. Miss Marple, however, found such tension revealing, for it was in discomfort that people betrayed their truths. Inspector Grayson had spent the morning questioning the staff, a butler, 2 maids, a cook, and the chauffeur, all of whom claimed to have been in their quarters at the time of Dr. Wilcox's death. Their alibis were consistent if unremarkable, and Miss Marple noted the inspector's growing frustration. The candlestick, the open window, and the mysterious key had yielded no immediate answers, and the tobacco scent remained an enigma, as no one admitted to smoking a pipe. Miss Marple, however, was not discouraged. She knew that alibis, like fine lace, often appeared flawless until examined closely. She decided to begin her own inquiries, starting with Lawrence Trent, whose polished charm intrigued her. She found him in the billiard room, idly rolling a cue ball across the green felt, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Trent," she said, her voice soft but deliberate, "might I have a word? I'm trying to understand Dr. Wilcox's role in the household. As Lady Beatrice's financial advisor, you must have worked closely with him." Trent's smile was immediate, though his eyes were wary. "Of course, Miss Marple. Dr. Wilcox was primarily Beatrice's physician, but he took an interest in the estate's affairs. He was meticulous, shall we say, always asking about accounts, investments, that sort of thing." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "And did you find his questions helpful, or perhaps intrusive?" Trent's fingers paused on the cue ball. He meant well, I'm sure, but he wasn't trained in finance. His concerns were often misplaced. "Concerns such as irregularities in the estate's accounts?" Miss Marple asked, her tone mild. Trent's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "I wouldn't say irregularities. The estate is complex, Miss Marple. Old debts, repairs, taxes, it's a tangle. Dr. Wilcox may have misunderstood." Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the slight tightening of Trent's jaw. She thanked him and moved on, her next conversation with Sir Reginald, whom she found in the study poring over a ledger. His face was flushed, his cane resting against the desk. "Sir Reginald," she began, "Mrs. Carver mentioned an argument you had with Dr. Wilcox about estate funds. Might you clarify what was discussed?" Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed. "Evelyn should mind her own business," he growled. "Wilcox was meddling, that's all. He thought he'd found some discrepancy in the accounts. Utter nonsense. I told him to stick to his pills and potions." "And was there a discrepancy?" Miss Marple asked, her voice gentle but probing. "Nothing of consequence," he said brusquely. "The estate's been mismanaged for years. My brother, Beatrice's late husband, was too soft. I'm trying to set things right." Miss Marple observed the ledger, its pages filled with neat figures but marked with corrections in red ink. Dr. Wilcox's questions must have been troubling to provoke such a reaction. Sir Reginald's hand was tightened on the desk. "He was out of his depth, Miss Marple. But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're thinking." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "I think only of the truth, Sir Reginald." Her next stop was Clara, who was in the conservatory, watering a row of ferns with trembling hands. Miss Marple approached gently, sensing the girl's fragility. "Clara, my dear," she said, "you mentioned voices in Dr. Wilcox's room. Have you remembered anything more? Perhaps about the shadow you saw?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. I don't know, Miss Marple. It was so quick, like a figure slipping past a window. I thought it was a man, but I can't be sure. I keep thinking about Dr. Wilcox. He was kind to me, always asking how I was. He knew I was unhappy." "Unhappy?" Miss Marple's voice was soft, inviting confidence. Clara hesitated, then whispered, "Father wants me to marry someone I don't love. Dr. Wilcox, he listened. He said I should follow my heart." Miss Marple's heart ached for the girl, but her mind seized on the detail. Dr. Wilcox, it seemed, had been more than a physician. He had been a confidant, perhaps too close to the household's secrets. As the day wore on, Miss Marple pieced together a timeline of the fatal night, based on the statements she had gathered. At 10 p.m., Sir Reginald claimed to have retired. Clara said she went to bed at 10:30, troubled by a headache. Mrs. Carver was writing letters until 11 o'clock, and Trent was reviewing papers until he fell asleep. Lady Beatrice, sleepless, heard nothing specific. Yet Clara's account of voices at midnight, and the thud that followed, suggested Dr. Wilcox was alive and speaking with someone just before his death. Miss Marple returned to the library, where she examined the desk again. The small key, now in the inspector's possession, nagged at her. She searched the room and found a locked drawer in a side table, its keyhole matching the key's size. Unable to open it, she made a mental note to inform Grayson. As evening approached, Inspector Grayson called the household together in the drawing room to report his findings. "We've found no signs of an intruder," he said, his voice grim. "The scuff marks by the window were made by a man's shoe, size 9, but they could belong to anyone in the house. The key you found, Miss Marple, fits a lockbox in Dr. Wilcox's room, but it's empty. We're still analysing the letter." Miss Marple listened, her mind turning over the clues. The empty lockbox was curious. Had its contents been removed before or after the murder? And the tobacco scent, why did no one claim it? She recalled a faint whiff of tobacco on Trent's coat during dinner, though he had denied smoking. As the meeting dispersed, Miss Marple caught Clara's eye and saw a flicker of fear. The girl was hiding something, and Miss Marple suspected it was more than a shadow. The alibis, so carefully constructed, were beginning to fray, and Miss Marple's little grey cells were hard at work, seeking the thread that would unravel the truth. Chapter 6. A Clue in the Ashes. The mist that enveloped Blackthorn Manor had begun to lift by noon, revealing the stark outlines of the estate's turrets against a pale sky. Inside, the atmosphere remained heavy, the household moving through their routines with the wariness of those who know a predator walks among them. Miss Jane Marple, however, was undeterred. Her morning had been spent in quiet observation, her knitting a constant companion as she sifted through the fragments of the puzzle that was Dr. Wilcox's murder. She had returned to the library, drawn by the lingering sense that it held more secrets than the police had uncovered. The desk, with its scattered papers and the small key now in Inspector Grayson's possession, was a focal point of her thoughts. She sat by the fireplace, her eyes scanning the room, when she noticed something overlooked in the initial search. A faint smudge of ash on the hearth, partially obscured by the fire screen. Kneeling carefully, her joints protesting only slightly, she examined it. The ash was fresh, not the residue of the morning's fire, and contained tiny flecks of paper, charred but not entirely consumed. Miss Marple's delicate fingers, accustomed to the precision of needlework, retrieved a fragment. It was small, no larger than a postage stamp, but bore traces of handwriting. Dr. Wilcox's, she suspected, from the precise loops she had seen in his unfinished letter. The fragment read only trust, and part of another word, perhaps deed or debt. She tucked it into her handkerchief, her mind alight with possibilities. Had someone burned a document here, hoping to destroy evidence? And if so, why in the library, where discovery was likely? She rose, her eyes falling on the locked drawer in the side table she had noticed the previous day. Without the key, it remained a mystery, but she suspected it held something Dr. Wilcox had valued or feared. She made a mental note to press Inspector Grayson about the lockbox's contents, or lack thereof, and to inquire whether any other papers had been found. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Lady Beatrice, who entered the library with a tray of tea, her face etched with worry. "Jane," she said, setting the tray down, "you've been so quiet, yet I know your mind is at work. Have you found anything to help us?" Miss Marple smiled, accepting a cup. "Only small things, my dear Beatrice, but small things like stitches in a pattern can lead to the whole. Tell me, did Dr. Wilcox ever speak of a document, perhaps a will, a deed, or something financial, that troubled him?" Beatrice's hands faltered as she poured her own tea. He did mention something a few weeks ago. He said the estate's accounts were not as they seemed, that there were discrepancies he couldn't explain. Was going to speak to Lawrence about it, but I don't know if he did. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. And did he keep such matters in a lockbox, or perhaps a locked drawer? Beatrice frowned. I believe he had a lockbox in his room, for his medical records and personal papers. But a drawer? I'm not sure. He spent much time in here, though, writing or reading. Thanking Beatrice, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over the new information. The ash, the letter, the locked drawer, all pointed to Dr. Wilcox's involvement in something beyond medicine. She decided to seek out Inspector Grayson, who was in the drawing room, reviewing notes with his constable. "Inspector," she said, approaching with her usual diffidence, "have you examined the fireplace in the library? There is ash there, with fragments of paper that may be significant. And the lockbox. Were there any papers inside, even if they seemed unimportant?" Grayson looked up, his expression a mix of respect and exasperation. "You're thorough, Miss Marple. We checked the lockbox, empty, as I said. But the fireplace, we didn't look closely. I'll have the constable collect the ash. Anything else?" "The tobacco scent," she said. "Have you confirmed whether anyone in the household smokes a pipe? It's a small detail, but persistent." Grayson shook his head. "No pipe smokers, though Sir Reginald's cigars could account for a similar smell. We're still checking the grounds for any discarded tobacco." Miss Marple nodded, though she doubted cigars were the answer. The scent in Dr. Wilcox's room had been distinct, sharp, not the rich aroma of Sir Reginald's Cubans. She thanked the inspector and made her way to the conservatory, where she found Clara Ashford alone, staring at the rain-streaked glass. "Clara," Miss Marple said softly, "you seem troubled. Is there more you wish to share? Perhaps about Dr. Wilcox or the voices you heard?" Clara's eyes were wide, her hands clasped tightly. I don't know what to say, Miss Marple. I told you about the voices, the shadow. But there's something else, Doctor. Wilcox gave me a letter 2 days ago. He said to keep it safe, not to tell anyone. I hid it in my room, but now I'm afraid to look at it." Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained calm. "A letter? My dear, that could be very important. Will you show it to me?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. They went to her room, a small feminine space with floral curtains and a writing desk. From a locked jewellery box, Clara retrieved a sealed envelope, addressed in Dr. Wilcox's hand to Miss Clara Ashford. With trembling fingers, she handed it to Miss Marple. The letter was brief, but revealing. "My dear Clara," it read, "I have uncovered something troubling about the estate's finances, which I must address with Mr. Trent. If anything should happen to me, take this to a solicitor you trust. The truth must not be buried." Enclosed was a single sheet, a copy of a ledger page, marked with red ink, and notations about unexplained withdrawals. Miss Marple's mind raced. The ledger page matched the corrections she had seen in Sir Reginald's study, and the word trust on the burned fragment now took on new meaning. Had Dr. Wilcox discovered a financial scheme, and had someone killed him to keep it hidden? "Clara," she said gently, "you've done the right thing. Keep this letter hidden for now, and tell no one. I will speak to Inspector Grayson when the time is right." As they returned to the drawing room, Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirl of connections. The ash, the letter, the ledger, the tobacco, all were pieces of a puzzle, and the picture was beginning to form. Someone in Blackthorn Manor had a secret worth killing for, and Miss Marple was determined to bring it to light. Chapter 7. The Cracks in the Facade. The afternoon at Blackthorn Manor was cloaked in a stillness that belied the storm brewing within its walls. The rain had begun to fall, a soft patter against the windows, and the household gathered in the drawing room, their faces etched with the strain of waiting. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual corner, her knitting needles moving with their familiar rhythm. But her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. The letter Clara had shown her, with its damning ledger page, had added a new thread to the tapestry of Dr. Wilcox's murder, and Miss Marple was determined to follow it. The morning's discoveries, the ash in the library, the locked drawer, the tobacco scent, had deepened her conviction that Dr. Wilcox's death was tied to the estate's finances. The ledger page, with its notations of unexplained withdrawals, suggested a deliberate act of concealment, and the burned fragment hinted at an attempt to destroy evidence. But whose hand had struck the fatal blow? And why? Miss Marple knew that the truth lay in the subtle contradictions of human behaviour, and she resolved to probe further. Inspector Grayson, meanwhile, was growing impatient. He had returned from examining the library fireplace, where the ash and paper fragments had been collected, and now stood before the group, his notebook open. "We've made some progress," he announced, his voice firm. "The ash in the library contained traces of a document, possibly in Dr. Wilcox's hand. We're working to reconstruct it. But I must ask again, does anyone know of a document he might have been protecting or destroying?" The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Sir Reginald shifted uncomfortably, his cane tapping once against the floor. Mrs. Evelyn Carver's lips tightened, her eyes fixed on her folded hands. Lawrence Trent offered a bland smile, while Clara's gaze dropped to the floor. Lady Beatrice, pale and drawn, shook her head. "Dr. Wilcox was private about his work," she said. "He never shared such things with me." Miss Marple, observing the group, noted the small tells. Sir Reginald's restless fingers, Mrs. Carver's rigid posture, Trent's too perfect calm. Clara's silence was the most telling. She knew of the letter but had kept it hidden, as Miss Marple had advised. The old lady decided to stir the waters gently. "Inspector," she said, her voice soft but clear, "might I suggest you inquire about Dr. Wilcox's habits? He spent much time in the library, and I understand he was concerned about the estate's finances. Perhaps someone here can shed light on what he was investigating." Grayson's eyes flicked to her, a mix of curiosity and irritation. "A fair point, Miss Marple. Mr. Trent, you're the financial advisor. Did Dr. Wilcox discuss any concerns with you?" Trent's smile remained, but his eyes hardened slightly. "He did ask questions, as I told Miss Marple. General inquiries about investments, nothing specific. I assured him everything was in order." Sir Reginald snorted. "Order? The estate's been bleeding money for years. Wilcox was poking his nose where it didn't belong." "Reginald," Lady Beatrice said sharply, "that's unfair. Dr. Wilcox only wanted to help." "Help?" Mrs. Carver's voice was icy. "He was a physician, not a banker. His meddling caused more trouble than it solved." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on the word meddling. It echoed Sir Reginald's earlier complaint, and Mrs. Carver's dismissive tone. Dr. Wilcox's curiosity had clearly unsettled more than one person in the household. She decided to shift her focus to Mrs. Carver, whose cold precision suggested a mind adept at concealment. After the meeting, Miss Marple found Mrs. Carver in the morning room, arranging a vase of roses with meticulous care. "Mrs. Carver," she began, her tone gentle, "you seem to have strong opinions about Dr. Wilcox's involvement in estate matters. Did you ever speak with him directly about his concerns?" Mrs. Carver's hands stilled, a rose stem snapping in her grip. "I had little to say to him," she replied. "He was Beatrice's physician, not mine. His questions about money were presumptuous." "Yet you overheard his argument with Sir Reginald," Miss Marple said, her eyes gentle but probing. "You mentioned irregularities. Did Dr. Wilcox ever hint at what those might be?" Mrs. Carver's lips pressed into a thin line. "He spoke in generalities, Miss Marple. Something about funds being misallocated. I told him to leave it to Mr. Trent. That was the end of it." Miss Marple nodded, noting the faint flush on Mrs. Carver's cheeks. The woman was hiding something, but her guard was up. Miss Marple thanked her and moved on, her thoughts turning to the library drawer. She returned to the room, determined to examine it more closely, and found Inspector Grayson there, studying the desk. "Miss Marple," he said, looking up, "you've got a knack for being where things happen. We've opened the drawer you mentioned. It contained nothing but old letters, personal ones from Dr. Wilcox to his sister, dated years ago. Nothing relevant." Miss Marple's brow furrowed slightly. "Nothing at all? No financial documents? No notes?" Grayson shook his head. "Empty, save for those letters. But the ash you pointed out, it's promising. The lab's working on it. We might get a clearer picture of what was burned." Miss Marple's mind raced. An empty drawer, an empty lockbox and burned paper. Someone had been thorough. She recalled Clara's letter still hidden, and decided it was time to share a portion of her findings with Grayson. "Inspector," she said, "I have reason to believe Dr. Wilcox was investigating financial discrepancies. He may have left a document with someone in the household. I suggest you search carefully, perhaps in private quarters." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "You know something, don't you, Miss Marple? If you've got evidence, you must share it." "Soon," she said, her voice calm. "I am still piecing things together, but I assure you, I will not withhold what matters." As evening fell, Miss Marple sat by her window, her notebook open. She wrote, "Burned paper, trust and deed, ledger page in Clara's possession, empty drawer, empty lockbox, tobacco scent, Trent, Sir Reginald's anger, Mrs. Carver's secrecy. Someone destroyed evidence, but not all." She paused, her pen hovering. The cracks in the household's facade were widening, and Miss Marple knew that one more push might bring the truth tumbling out. Chapter 8. The Breaking Point. The rain had ceased, but a damp chill lingered in Blackthorn Manor, seeping into the bones of its inhabitants and heightening the tension that gripped the household. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing-room with her knitting, felt the weight of the atmosphere as keenly as she felt the threads in her hands. The murder of Dr. Wilcox had fractured the fragile civility of the group, and now, as the third day of the investigation dawned, Miss Marple sensed that someone was close to breaking. The morning had brought a new development. Inspector Grayson's team had reconstructed part of the burned document from the library fireplace. It was, as Miss Marple had suspected, in Dr. Wilcox's hand, and though much was lost, a few phrases were legible: breach of trust, estate funds, and concealed debt. The inspector shared this with the household during a tense gathering in the dining room, his eyes scanning their faces for reactions. "This document," Grayson said, holding up a photograph of the fragments, "suggests Dr. Wilcox was investigating financial irregularities. Someone burned it to hide the truth. I'll ask again, does anyone know what he was working on?" The silence was heavy, broken only by Sir Reginald's sharp intake of breath. "Preposterous," he muttered, his cane tapping the floor. "Wilcox was a doctor, not an accountant. He was meddling in things he didn't understand." Mrs. Evelyn Carver's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Or perhaps he understood too much, Reginald. You were quick to argue with him about money, weren't you?" Sir Reginald's face reddened. "Watch your tongue, Evelyn. I won't be accused by the likes of you." Clara, seated beside her father, flinched at his outburst, her hands twisting in her lap. Lawrence Trent, ever the peacemaker, raised a hand. "Let's not turn on each other," he said smoothly. "Doctor, Wilcox's concerns were likely a misunderstanding. I assured him the accounts were sound." Miss Marple's eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, noted every detail. Sir Reginald's defensive anger, Mrs. Carver's calculated jab, Trent's deflecting calm, and Clara's silent distress. Lady Beatrice, pale and trembling, looked as if she might speak, but she remained silent, her eyes fixed on the table. After the meeting, Miss Marple sought out Clara, finding her in the conservatory, where the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and flowers. The girl's face was drawn, her eyes red from unshed tears. "Clara, my dear," Miss Marple said gently, "you are carrying a heavy burden. The letter Dr. Wilcox gave you, it weighs on you, does it not?" Clara's breath hitched, and she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I can't stop thinking about it, Miss Marple. He trusted me, and now he's dead. What if someone knows I have it?" Miss Marple's hand rested lightly on Clara's arm. "You've been brave to keep it safe, but I think it's time to share it with Inspector Grayson. It may hold the key to why Doctor Wilcox was killed." Clara's eyes widened in panic. "But what if it puts me in danger?" Father's so angry, and Mr. Trent, he's been watching me, I'm sure of it." Miss Marple's expression softened, but her mind was alert. "You must trust me, Clara. I will ensure the inspector handles this discreetly, but we cannot let fear silence the truth." Reluctantly, Clara agreed, and they went together to her room, where she retrieved the letter from her jewellery box. Miss Marple examined it again, noting the ledger page with its red-inked notations of unexplained withdrawals. She felt a surge of certainty. This was the motive for Dr. Wilcox's murder. Someone in the household had been siphoning funds, and he had discovered it. They found Inspector Grayson in the library, where he was examining the locked drawer Miss Marple had pointed out. She presented the letter, explaining how Clara had received it from Dr. Wilcox. Grayson's eyes narrowed as he read it, his fingers tracing the ledger page. "This is significant," he said. "It suggests embezzlement, and Wilcox was about to expose it. Miss Ashford, why didn't you come forward sooner?" Clara's voice trembled. "I was afraid. Dr. Wilcox said to keep it secret, and after he died, I didn't know who to trust." Grayson nodded, his expression softening. "You've done the right thing now. We'll keep this between us for the moment." As Clara left, Miss Marple lingered, her mind turning over the new evidence. "Inspector," she said, "the tobacco scent in Dr. Wilcox's room. Have you made any progress there? It's a small detail, but it troubles me." Grayson frowned. "No pipe smokers, as I said. But we found a cigarette stub in the garden, near the window of Wilcox's room. It's not much, but we're testing it for traces of who handled it." Miss Marple's thoughts flashed to Lawrence Trent, whose coat had carried a faint whiff of tobacco at dinner. Cigarettes were not pipes, but the discrepancy intrigued her. She thanked Grayson and returned to the drawing-room, where the household was gathered, their nerves fraying under the weight of suspicion. As evening approached, Miss Marple noticed a change in Lady Beatrice. The woman, usually so composed, seemed on edge, her hands fluttering as she spoke of the Manor's history. "This house," she said, her voice low, "has always held secrets. My husband, he trusted too easily. I fear Dr. Wilcox paid the price for that." Miss Marple's eyes met Beatrice's, and she saw a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or fear. "Beatrice," she said softly, "if you know something, you must share it, for Dr. Wilcox's sake." Beatrice's lips parted, but before she could speak, a cry rang out from the hall. It was Clara, her face white, clutching her arm where a fresh bruise was forming. "Someone pushed me," she gasped. "I was coming down the stairs and I felt a hand. Someone meant to harm me." The household erupted in chaos. Sir Reginald demanding answers, Mrs. Carver accusing Clara of dramatics, and Trent rushing to her side. Miss Marple, however, remained calm, her mind racing. Clara's revelation of the letter had made her a target, and the cracks in the household's facade were now gaping wide. Someone was desperate to keep their secret buried, and Miss Marple knew the time for gentle probing was over. Chapter 9. The Trap is Set. The air in Blackthorn Manor was thick with suspicion, the incident on the stairs having shattered what little harmony remained among the household. Clara's cry of being pushed had sent ripples of fear and accusation through the group, and Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing-room with her knitting, observed the fraying tempers with a calm but vigilant eye. The bruise on Clara's arm, fresh and livid, was no accident, and Miss Marple knew that the murderer was growing reckless, their carefully constructed facade crumbling under pressure. Inspector Grayson, summoned by the commotion, questioned Clara in the presence of the others. "You're certain you were pushed, Miss Ashford?" He asked, his notebook open, his tone measured. "Did you see anyone or hear anything specific?" Clara, her voice trembling but resolute, shook her head. "It was dark on the landing, and it happened so quickly. I felt a hand on my back, firm, deliberate. I nearly fell, but I caught the banister." Sir Reginald's face was thunderous. "This is outrageous. Someone in this house is a menace, and I demand you find them, Inspector." Mrs. Evelyn Carver, her expression cool, raised an eyebrow. "Clara, are you sure you didn't simply trip? The stairs are old, and you've been under strain." Clara's eyes flashed. "I know what I felt, Mrs. Carver. Someone meant to hurt me." Lawrence Trent, standing near Clara, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're all shaken, Inspector, but Clara's no hysteric. If she says she was pushed, I believe her." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her mind cataloguing every word, every glance. Trent's protective gesture seemed genuine, but his quick support of Clara raised a question. Was he truly concerned, or was he seizing an opportunity to deflect suspicion? Lady Beatrice, pale and silent, clutched her shawl, her eyes darting between Clara and the others. Miss Marple sensed that Beatrice, too, was on the verge of revealing something, but fear held her back. After the inspector dismissed the group, Miss Marple approached him privately in the library. "Inspector Grayson," she said, her voice low, "the attack on Clara suggests our murderer is desperate. The letter she showed us, with its ledger page, points to financial misconduct. I believe Dr. Wilcox was killed to silence his discovery, and now Clara is a threat because she holds that evidence." Grayson nodded, his expression grim. "I agree, Miss Marple. The ledger page shows withdrawals totaling thousands, siphoned over months. We're tracing the accounts, but it's slow work. Whoever did this had access to the estate's funds, and a motive to keep it hidden." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "And the cigarette stub you found in the garden, any results?" Grayson hesitated. "We found traces of a rare tobacco blend, not common cigars or cigarettes. It's sold locally, but no one in the household admits to using it. We're checking the staff again." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts returning to the faint tobacco scent on Lawrence Trent's coat. It was not proof, but it was a thread to tug. She decided it was time to set a trap, to force the murderer's hand. "Inspector," she said, "might I suggest a gathering tonight? Announce that you've found new evidence, perhaps a witness who saw someone near Dr. Wilcox's room. Watch their reactions. The guilty will betray themselves." Grayson's brow furrowed, but he nodded. "A bold move, Miss Marple, but it might work. I'll arrange it for after dinner." That evening the household gathered in the drawing room, the fire casting long shadows across the walls. Inspector Grayson stood before them, his demeanour grave. "I have an update," he said. "We've uncovered new evidence. A witness who claims to have seen someone leaving Dr. Wilcox's room shortly before midnight. I won't say more now, but we're close to an arrest." The effect was immediate. Sir Reginald's cane froze mid-tap, his eyes narrowing. Mrs. Carver's hands tightened in her lap, her lips a thin line. Trent's smile faltered, his fingers brushing his coat pocket. Clara gasped softly, her eyes darting to Miss Marple, who gave her a reassuring nod. Lady Beatrice's face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands. Miss Marple watched, her mind sharp as a blade. The announcement was a fiction, but the reactions were real. Sir Reginald's sudden stillness suggested fear. Mrs. Carver's tension hinted at calculation. Trent's gesture to his pocket was curious. Did he carry something incriminating? Beatrice's distress, however, was the most telling. Miss Marple resolved to speak with her privately. After the gathering, as the others dispersed, Miss Marple found Beatrice in the conservatory, staring at the rain-slicked glass. "Beatrice," she said gently, "you're carrying a great weight. Dr. Wilcox's death, Clara's attack, something troubles you deeply. Will you not share it?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Jane, I've been such a fool. I knew the estate was struggling, but I trusted Lawrence to manage it. Dr. Wilcox, he came to me a week ago, said he'd found evidence of funds being misused. He begged me to confront Lawrence, but I couldn't believe it. I told him to wait, to be sure, and now he's dead." Miss Marple's heart ached for her friend, but her mind seized on the confirmation. "Did you tell anyone else what Dr. Wilcox said?" Beatrice shook her head. "No, but Lawrence was in the room when I spoke to Dr. Wilcox. He might have overheard." Miss Marple's thoughts raced. Trent, with his smooth charm and access to the estate's accounts, was now the focal point of her suspicions. The tobacco scent, the ledger page, Beatrice's revelation, all pointed to him. But she needed proof. And the trap she had set was only the beginning. As she returned to her room, Miss Marple opened her notebook, her pen moving swiftly. Trent overheard Wilcox's concerns. Ledger page confirms embezzlement. Tobacco scent links to Trent's coat. Clara's attack, a warning. Tonight's announcement has stirred the pot. The guilty will act soon. She closed the notebook, her eyes gleaming with quiet resolve. The trap was set, and Miss Marple was ready to catch her quarry. Chapter 10. The Net Tightens. The atmosphere in Blackthorn Manor was taut as a bowstring. The echoes of Inspector Grayson's announcement still reverberating through the household. Miss Jane Marple, seated by the fire in the drawing-room, her knitting needles moving with their usual quiet rhythm, felt the tension like a pulse. Her trap had been set, and the reactions it provoked, Sir Reginald's frozen stillness, Mrs. Carver's guarded tension, Lawrence Trent's fleeting unease, and Lady Beatrice's collapse into tears, had confirmed her suspicions. The murderer was among them, and they were growing desperate. The evening had passed without incident, but Miss Marple knew that desperation often led to action. She had retired to her room early, leaving her door slightly ajar, her senses alert for any sound in the night. Her notebook lay open on the bedside table, its pages filled with her meticulous observations. The ledger page, the burned fragment, the tobacco scent, Clara's attack, and now Beatrice's revelation that Lawrence Trent might have overheard Dr. Wilcox's concerns about the estate's finances. Each clue was a thread, and Miss Marple was weaving them into a net to catch the guilty. At 11:30, a faint creak in the corridor roused her. She extinguished her candle and moved silently to the door, peering through the crack. A figure, cloaked in shadow, moved stealthily toward the library. The silhouette was tall, masculine, Trent she suspected, though the darkness obscured certainty. She waited, her heart steady, until the figure disappeared, then slipped into her dressing gown and followed, her slippers silent on the carpet. The library was dimly lit by a single lamp, and Miss Marple paused at the door, listening. A soft rustle, the scrape of a drawer, someone was searching. She stepped inside, her voice soft but firm. "Good evening. Might I assist you in finding something?" The figure spun around, revealing Lawrence Trent, his face pale, but his smile quick. "Miss Marple, you startled me. I was looking for a book to help me sleep." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained mild. "At this hour, Mr. Trenter, and in the locked drawer of the side table, I presume." Trent's smile faltered, his hand still on the drawer. "I thought I'd left some papers here. Estate matters, you understand." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, stepping closer. "Papers like those Dr. Wilcox was investigating? Perhaps a ledger, or a letter outlining financial discrepancies." Trent's eyes narrowed, but he recovered his composure. "You're a curious lady, Miss Marple, but I assure you I'm only tidying up loose ends." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The drawer, she noted, was now open, revealing a small bundle of papers. Accounts by the look of them, marked with the same red ink as Clara's ledger page. She made no move to touch them, but her presence had clearly unnerved Trent. "Be careful, Mr. Trent," she said softly. "Loose ends have a way of tangling those who try to cut them." Trent excused himself, his departure hasty, and Miss Marple examined the papers briefly before replacing them. They confirmed what she suspected. Withdrawals from the estate's accounts, funneled through a series of obscure transactions, all initialed by Trent. But she needed more than papers. She needed proof of murder. The next morning, Miss Marple met with Inspector Grayson in the library, sharing her encounter with Trent. "He was searching the drawer," she said, "and I believe he meant to remove those papers. They matched the ledger page Clara gave us. I suggest you secure them before they disappear." Grayson, now fully appreciative of Miss Marple's acumen, nodded. "I'll have them collected and analysed, but we need more than financial fraud to pin a murder on him. The candlestick, the tobacco, the window, none of it ties directly to Trent yet." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Patience, Inspector. The guilty always leave a trace. Have you checked Mr. Trent's belongings for that rare tobacco blend?" Grayson's eyes lit up. "We're doing that today. His room, Sir Reginald's, everyone's. If we find a match, it's a step closer." As the day progressed, Miss Marple continued her quiet observations. She spoke with Sir Reginald, whose anger seemed to mask a deeper fear. "If Trent's been stealing," he growled, "he's betrayed us all. But murder? That's a leap, Miss Marple." Mrs. Carver, when approached, was dismissive. "Trent's a charming rogue, but a killer? I doubt he has the nerve." Yet her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, as if she knew more than she said. Clara, still shaken by her fall, confided in Miss Marple privately. "I saw Mr. Trent in the hall last night, near the library," she whispered. "He looked furtive. I didn't tell the inspector because I'm afraid of him." Miss Marple patted her hand. "You've been brave, Clara. Stay close to the others and say nothing for now." By evening, Grayson had news. "We found a tin of that rare tobacco in Trent's room," he said, his voice low. "Hidden in a coat pocket. It matches the stub from the garden. It's not proof of murder, but it's damning." Miss Marple nodded, her mind fitting the pieces together. Trent's presence in the library, the tobacco, the ledger, his overheard conversation with Dr. Wilcox, all pointed to him. But the candlestick and the window still puzzled her. Why stage an intruder, and why attack Clara? She suspected a second player, someone complicit or coerced, and her thoughts turned to Lady Beatrice's distress. That night, Miss Marple lay awake, her notebook open. "Trent is the key," she wrote. embezzlement, tobacco, library search. But the candlestick suggests impulse, not planning. Was he alone? Beatrice's fear, Clara's fall, someone else knows. The net was tightening, and Miss Marple knew the final act was near. Chapter 11. The Confession in the Shadows. The fourth day at Blackthorn Manor dawned with a pale sun piercing the lingering mist, casting long shadows across the estate's lawns. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation, as if the house itself sensed the nearing climax of the drama unfolding within its walls. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her usual corner of the drawing-room, her knitting a steady rhythm, felt the pulse of the case quickening. The discovery of the rare tobacco in Lawrence Trent's room had tightened the net around him. But Miss Marple knew the truth was not yet fully woven. There were still threads to tie: Clara's attack, the staged window, and Lady Beatrice's unspoken burden. Inspector Grayson, now openly valuing Miss Marple's insights, had spent the morning interrogating Trent. The solicitor's polished charm had cracked under pressure, his denials less convincing as Grayson presented the tobacco tin and the ledger pages from the library drawer. Yet Trent maintained his innocence in Dr. Wilcox's murder, admitting only to minor financial oversights that he claimed were misunderstandings. Miss Marple, listening to Grayson's report, was unconvinced. Embezzlement was a motive, but the candlestick and the open window suggested a crime of passion or panic, not cold calculation. Her thoughts were interrupted by Lady Beatrice, who approached her with a look of quiet desperation. "Jane," she whispered, drawing her to a secluded corner of the room, "I must speak with you. I can't bear this any longer." Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her mind was alert. "My dear Beatrice, you have carried too much alone. Tell me what troubles you." Beatrice's hands trembled as she clasped them together. "It's about Lawrence and me. I've been a fool, Jane. Months ago he came to me, said the estate was in trouble, that we could save it with creative accounting. I trusted him. I let him move funds, thinking 'twas temporary. But Dr. Wilcox found out. He confronted me, said it was fraud. I begged him to wait, to let me fix it, but then he was killed." Miss Marple's needles paused, her heart aching for her friend's guilt, but her mind seizing on the confession. "Did you tell Mr. Trent that Dr. Wilcox knew?" Beatrice nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't mean to betray him, Jane. I told Lawrence we had to come clean, but he was furious. He said he'd handle it. That night, I heard voices, his and Dr. Wilcox's. I'm sure of it. I didn't know what he'd do." Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. "Beatrice, you must tell Inspector Grayson this. It is vital." Beatrice shook her head, her voice breaking. "I'm afraid, Jane. If Lawrence killed him, what might he do to me? Or Clara?" Miss Marple took her hand. "You are not alone, Beatrice. I will be with you, and the inspector will protect you. But the truth must come out for Dr. Wilcox's sake, and Clara's." Reluctantly, Beatrice agreed, and Miss Marple escorted her to the library, where Grayson was reviewing evidence. Beatrice's confession poured out, her voice trembling but resolute. Grayson listened intently, his notebook filling with rapid scrawls. "This changes things," he said. "Trent's got motive, opportunity, and now a direct link to Wilcox's concerns. We'll bring him in for formal questioning." As Beatrice left, shaken but relieved, Miss Marple lingered. "Inspector," she said, "Mr. Trent is central, but I wonder about Clara's attack. The push on the stairs was no accident. If Trent is the murderer, Why target her? And the window? Why stage an intruder when the candlestick suggests an impulsive act? Grayson frowned. You think there's another player? I think, Miss Marple said, her eyes gleaming, that someone else may be complicit, or protecting Trent. Sir Reginald's anger, Mrs. Carver's secrecy, even Clara's fear, they all hint at deeper connections. That afternoon, Miss Marple sought out Sir Reginald, finding him in the study, a glass of brandy in hand, despite the early hour. His face was haggard, his cane resting against the desk. Sir Reginald, she began, you've been vocal about Dr. Wilcox's meddling. Did you know he suspected fraud in the estate's accounts? Sir Reginald's eyes flashed. I knew he was stirring trouble, yes. Said the accounts didn't add up. I told him to leave it to Trent. The man's a solicitor, for God's sake. Miss Marple's tone remained gentle. And when you argued with him, did you suspect Mr. Trent was involved? Sir Reginald hesitated, his fingers tightening on the glass. I had my doubts. Money's been tight, and Trent's been too smooth about it. But murder? I didn't think him capable. Miss Marple nodded, noting the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Sir Reginald was protective of Clara, but his anger at Wilcox suggested he too had secrets. She thanked him and moved on, her thoughts turning to Mrs. Carver, whose icy demeanour had always struck her as a shield. She found Mrs. Carver in the morning room, writing letters with her usual precision. Mrs. Carver, Miss Marple said, you've been quick to dismiss Dr. Wilcox's concerns. Yet you overheard his argument with Sir Reginald. Did you ever suspect Mr. Trent of wrongdoing? Mrs. Carver's pen paused, her eyes cold. Trent's a charming opportunist, Miss Marple. I suspected he was skimming funds, but I had no proof. Wilcox's nosiness was bound to get him in trouble. Miss Marple's mind seized on the admission. And did you share your suspicions with anyone? Perhaps Mr. Trent himself? Mrs. Carver's lips tightened. I keep my own counsel, Miss Marple. I told you, I stay out of estate matters. But Miss Marple was not convinced. Mrs. Carver's detachment felt calculated, as if she were distancing herself from a truth she knew too well. As evening fell, Miss Marple sat in her room, her notebook open. Beatrice's confession implicates Trent, she wrote. Tobacco, ledger, voices. But Clara's attack and the window suggest another hand. Mrs. Carver knows more. Sir Reginald's anger, protective or guilty. The net tightens, but the final knot is not yet tied. Chapter 12. The Gathering Storm. The fifth day at Blackthorn Manor brought a restless energy, as if the house itself sensed the approaching resolution of its dark mystery. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing-room with her knitting, felt the threads of the case drawing tighter. The pattern of Dr. Wilcox's murder becoming clearer. Lady Beatrice's confession had placed Lawrence Trent at the heart of the crime, his embezzlement exposed by the ledger page, and his presence linked to the tobacco scent. Yet the candlestick, the open window, and Clara's attack hinted at complexities Miss Marple had not fully unravelled. She knew the truth was close, but it required one final push to bring it into the light. Inspector Grayson, emboldened by Beatrice's revelation, had taken Trent into custody for questioning, though he lacked the definitive evidence to charge him with murder. The household was on edge, their interactions marked by strained silences and wary glances. Miss Marple, ever observant, noted Sir Reginald's increasing agitation, Mrs. Carver's calculated detachment, and Clara's quiet fear. Lady Beatrice, though relieved of her secret, seemed haunted by guilt, her eyes avoiding Trent's empty chair at breakfast. Miss Marple decided it was time to apply more pressure. She approached Inspector Grayson in the library, where he was reviewing the reconstructed fragments of the burned document. "Inspector," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Mr. Trent is cornered, but he is not alone in this. The attack on Clara and the staged window suggest a confederate, or someone acting out of fear. I propose we gather the household tonight and reveal what we know. The guilty will react, and we may catch them unawares." Grayson's brow furrowed, but he nodded. "You're suggesting another trap, Miss Marple. It worked before, and with Trent under scrutiny, it might shake something loose. What exactly do you want me to say?" "Announce that you found a witness to Clara's attack," Miss Marple said. "Say they saw someone on the stairs, but don't name them. Watch Sir Reginald and Mrs. Carver closely. They both have motives, to protect or conceal, and keep an eye on Clara. Her fear may draw out the truth." Grayson agreed, and the plan was set for after dinner. Miss Marple spent the afternoon in quiet observation, seeking out small details that might confirm her suspicions. She visited Clara, who was in her room, her face pale but determined. "Miss Marple," Clara said, "I've been thinking about the letter Dr. Wilcox gave me. He said to take it to a solicitor I trust. Do you think he meant Mr. Trent couldn't be trusted?" Miss Marple's eyes softened. "I believe Dr. Wilcox knew Mr. Trent was involved in something dishonest, my dear. But tell me, have you noticed anything unusual about your father or Mrs. Carver? They both seem protective in their own ways." Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting her handkerchief. "Father's been so angry, especially since Dr. Wilcox's death. He keeps saying the estate's ruined, that we'll lose everything. And Mrs. Carver, she's been watching me, like she's waiting for me to say something wrong." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the information. Sir Reginald's anger could stem from fear of exposure, and Mrs. Carver's vigilance suggested she knew more than she admitted. The old lady thanked Clara and moved on, her thoughts turning to the candlestick. Its weight and the angle of Dr. Wilcox's wound suggested a spontaneous act, not the calculated strike of a seasoned criminal. Trent, she suspected, had acted in panic, but someone else might have helped cover his tracks. That evening, the household gathered in the drawing room, the fire casting flickering shadows on the walls. Inspector Grayson stood before them, his expression grave. "I have an update," he said. "We've found a witness who saw someone on the stairs when Miss Ashford was pushed. They're prepared to identify the person. We're also analysing new evidence from the burned document, which points to a clear motive for Dr. Wilcox's murder." The room erupted in murmurs. Sir Reginald's face darkened, his cane gripping the floor. "This is absurd," he barked. "You're accusing one of us without proof." Mrs. Carver's eyes narrowed, her voice icy. "A witness, Inspector, and why haven't they come forward before now?" Clara, seated beside Lady Beatrice, shrank back, her eyes wide. Beatrice herself looked as if she might faint, her hands trembling. Miss Marple, watching from her corner, noted every reaction. Sir Reginald's outburst was defensive, Mrs. Carver's question probing, and Clara's fear palpable. But it was the absence of Trent, still in custody, that hung over the room like a spectre. After the announcement, Miss Marple approached Mrs. Carver, who lingered by the fireplace. "Mrs. Carver," she said gently, "you seem sceptical of the witness." Do you have reason to doubt such a person exists?" Mrs. Carver's lips tightened. "I doubt everything, Miss Marple. This house is full of secrets, and I've learned to trust no one. If someone pushed Clara, they had their reasons." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. And what might those reasons be? Perhaps a fear that Clara knew too much, as Dr. Wilcox did. Mrs. Carver's gaze flickered, but she turned away without answering. Miss Marple, undeterred, made her way to Sir Reginald, who was pacing by the window. "Sir Reginald," she said, "your concern for Clara is evident. But your anger at Dr. Wilcox, did it stem from his questions about the estate, or something more personal?" Sir Reginald stopped, his face flushed. "Wilcox was a busybody," he growled. "He threatened everything, Clara's future, the estate. But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're after." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The trap had stirred the household, and the storm was gathering. She returned to her room, her notebook open. "Trent's embezzlement confirmed," she wrote. "Beatrice's confession, tobacco ledger." But Sir Reginald's anger and Mrs. Carver's secrecy suggest complicity. Clara's attack, a warning or a mistake. The candlestick and window remain the key. The truth was near, and Miss Marple was ready to pull the final thread. Chapter 13. The Unravelling Thread. The 6th day at Blackthorn Manor dawned with a brittle clarity, the sun cutting through the last wisps of mist to reveal the estate in stark relief. Inside, the tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with each passing hour. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with her knitting, felt the weight of the case pressing toward its climax. The trap set the previous evening had stirred the household, and the reactions, Sir Reginald's defensive bluster, Mrs. Carver's probing scepticism, Clara's palpable fear, had confirmed her suspicions that Lawrence Trent was not acting alone. The candlestick, the open window, and Clara's attack pointed to a second hand, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover it. Inspector Grayson, now fully reliant on Miss Marple's insights, met her in the library to discuss the latest findings. "The tobacco tin from Trent's room," he said, his voice low, "matches the stub in the garden exactly. And the ledger pages you found in the drawer? Our accountants confirm they show a pattern of embezzlement, funneled through dummy accounts. Trent's guilty of fraud, no question, but the murder, we need more." Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. "Indeed, Inspector, the candlestick suggests an impulsive act, not the work of a man like Trent, who plans carefully. And Clara's attack, why risk it unless someone feared what she knew? I believe another in this house is complicit, either as an accomplice or out of fear." Grayson nodded, his expression grim. "I've questioned Trent again. He's sticking to his story, admits to creative accounting, but denies killing Wilcox. Says he was in his room all night. No alibi, but no hard evidence either." Miss Marple's mind turned to the open window and the scuff marks, staged to suggest an intruder. "The window," she said, "was meant to mislead, but it was clumsy." A true intruder would not leave such obvious marks. Someone in the household wanted us to look outside, not within. Grayson rubbed his chin. "You're thinking Sir Reginald or Mrs. Carver?" "Or someone protecting them," Miss Marple said. "Sir Reginald's anger at Dr. Wilcox was personal, not just financial. And Mrs. Carver's detachment hides a keen awareness. We must press them both." Determined to test her theory, Miss Marple sought out Sir Reginald, finding him in the study, his face haggard as he pored over the estate's accounts. "Sir Reginald," she began, her voice gentle but probing, "you've spoken of Dr. Wilcox's meddling, but I sense there's more. Did he threaten something dear to you? Perhaps Clara's future?" Sir Reginald's hand froze on the ledger, his eyes flashing. "Wilcox was a fool, stirring up trouble about money we don't have. Clara's all I've got left, Miss Marple. I'd do anything to protect her." "Anything?" Miss Marple's tone was soft, but her eyes were piercing. "Even silence a man who knew too much?" Sir Reginald's face reddened, his cane thumping the floor. "I didn't kill him. I argued, yes, but I was in my room when he died. Ask Clara. She'll tell you." Miss Marple nodded, filing away his vehemence. She then sought Mrs. Carver, who was in the conservatory, pruning roses with surgical precision. "Mrs. Carver," Miss Marple said, "you've been careful to distance yourself from this affair. Yet you knew of Dr. Wilcox's suspicions. Did you ever confront Mr. Trent about them?" Mrs. Carver's scissors paused, her eyes cold. "I told you, Miss Marple, I stay out of estate matters. Trent's a schemer, but I had no reason to interfere. Wilcox's death was his own doing. He poked into things best left alone." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "And yet you've watched Clara closely, as if you fear what she might say. Why is that?" Mrs. Carver's gaze flickered, but she turned back to her roses. "Clara's a nervous girl, prone to exaggeration. I watch her because someone must." Miss Marple thanked her and withdrew, her mind racing. Mrs. Carver's evasion was telling, and Sir Reginald's protectiveness of Clara suggested a deeper motive. She recalled Clara's fear, her mention of Trent watching her, and the bruise on her arm. The pieces were aligning, but one crucial thread remained loose. That afternoon, Miss Marple visited Clara, who was in her room, clutching the handkerchief that had become her constant companion. "Clara, my dear," Miss Marple said, "you've been brave, but I need you to be braver still. The night you were pushed, did you see or hear anything that might identify your attacker? Even the smallest detail could help." Clara's eyes filled with tears. I thought I heard a rustle, like a coat, and a faint smell, like father's cigars. But it can't be him, Miss Marple. He wouldn't hurt me." Miss Marple's heart sank, but her mind seized on the detail. Cigars, not pipe tobacco, but the scent was close enough to confuse in the dark. She patted Clara's hand. "You've done well, my dear. Rest now, and trust me." That evening, Miss Marple met with Grayson again, sharing Clara's revelation. "Sir Reginald's cigars," she said. "They're not the rare tobacco." But in the heat of the moment, Clara might have mistaken the scent. "I believe he was on the stairs, perhaps to warn her, perhaps to protect Trent." Grayson's eyes widened. "You think Sir Reginald's covering for Trent?" "Or coerced by him," Miss Marple said. "Trent holds the estate's finances, and Clara's future. Sir Reginald may feel he has no choice." As night fell, Miss Marple sat in her room, her notebook open. "Trent's embezzlement, tobacco voices," she wrote. "Sir Reginald's cigars, Clara's attack, the staged window. A partnership, willing or forced, between Trent and Sir Reginald. The thread unravels, but the final proof awaits." The truth was close, and Miss Marple was ready to pull it free. Chapter 14. The Final Confrontation. The 7th day at Blackthorn Manor was charged with an electric stillness, as if the house itself held its breath, awaiting the revelation that would shatter its secrets. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the drawing room with her knitting, felt the weight of the case reaching its crescendo. The threads of Dr. Wilcox's murder, Trent's embezzlement, the tobacco scent, Clara's attack, Sir Reginald's cigars, and the staged window had woven a net around Lawrence Trent, and she suspected Sir Reginald Ashford. Yet the final proof required a dramatic unveiling, and Miss Marple was ready to orchestrate it. Inspector Grayson, now fully aligned with her strategy, agreed to her plan for a final gathering. "We'll confront them tonight," he said, his voice low as they met in the library. "Trent's cracking, and your theory about Sir Reginald makes sense. The cigars, the ledger, the attack on Clara, it's all pointing to a partnership. But we need a confession, or at least a mistake." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes gleaming. "We must apply pressure, Inspector. Announce that you've found definitive evidence linking the murderer to the candlestick, and hint that Clara's attacker has been identified. The guilty will falter, and we shall see who breaks." Throughout the day, Miss Marple moved quietly among the household, her presence unassuming, but her observations razor-sharp. Sir Reginald was more agitated than ever, his cane tapping a relentless rhythm as he paced the study. Mrs. Carver remained aloof, her eyes watchful, as if anticipating a storm. Clara, though pale, seemed steadier, bolstered by Miss Marple's reassurance. Lady Beatrice, still burdened by guilt, avoided Trent's gaze when he was brought into the drawing-room under guard for the evening's confrontation. As dusk fell, the household gathered in the drawing-room, the fire casting long, flickering shadows. Inspector Grayson stood before them, his demeanour authoritative. "We have reached a turning point," he announced. "New evidence has come to light. The candlestick used to kill Dr. Wilcox bears traces of a rare substance, a polish used only in this house, found in the butler's pantry. We've also identified the person who pushed Miss Ashford on the stairs. The truth is close, and I urge anyone with knowledge to come forward now." The room was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Sir Reginald's face was ashen, his hand gripping his cane so tightly his knuckles whitened. Mrs. Carver's lips tightened, her eyes darting to Trent. Clara clutched Lady Beatrice's hand, her breath shallow. Trent, seated under the constable's watchful eye, forced a smile, but his fingers twitched nervously. Miss Marple, her knitting resting in her lap, spoke softly. "Inspector, might I add a word? Dr. Wilcox was killed because he uncovered a truth that threatened someone in this room. The ledger page, the burned document, the tobacco scent, they all point to a scheme to defraud the estate. But the candlestick, the open window, and the attack on Clara suggest more than one hand at work. A partnership, perhaps, born of necessity or coercion." Sir Reginald's voice broke the silence, hoarse with rage. "This is nonsense! You're accusing me, aren't you? I had nothing to do with Wilcox's death." Clara's eyes widened, and she whispered, "Father, please." Mrs. Carver's voice was cold. "If you're looking for a culprit, Inspector, Mr. Trent's your man. His accounts, his tobacco, his presence in the library, it's all too neat." Trent's smile vanished, his voice sharp. "Evelyn, that's rich, coming from you. You've been sniffing around the accounts yourself, haven't you? Trying to secure your share." The room erupted in accusations, voices overlapping until Grayson raised a hand. "Enough! Mr. Trent, we have the tobacco tin from your room. matching the stub in the garden. The ledger pages show your initials on fraudulent transactions. And Lady Beatrice has confirmed you knew Dr. Wilcox was on to you." Trent's face paled, but he shook his head. "I didn't kill him. Yes, I moved funds. Beatrice agreed to it. But I was in my room that night, I swear it." Miss Marple's voice cut through the tension, gentle but piercing. "Mr. Trent, you were heard arguing with Dr. Wilcox shortly before his death. The tobacco scent places you in his room. But the candlestick, it was an impulsive act, wasn't it? And the window, staged to suggest an intruder. Someone helped you. Someone who feared exposure as much as you did." Sir Reginald stood abruptly, his cane clattering to the floor. "Stop this!" he roared. I can't let this go on. It was me, damn it. I pushed Clara. I didn't mean to hurt her, just to scare her into silence. She had that letter, and Trent said it could ruin us all. I didn't kill Wilcox, but I helped cover it up." Clara gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Father, how could you?" Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was relentless. "Sir Reginald, you acted to protect Clara's future, didn't you? Mr. Trent convinced you the estate's ruin would destroy her prospects. But you knew he killed Dr. Wilcox." Sir Reginald sank into his chair, his face crumpling. "He came to me that night, said Wilcox was dead, that it was an accident. He begged me to help, said we'd lose everything if the truth came out. I opened the window, made the scuff marks. God help me, I did it for Clara." Trent lunged forward, his voice desperate. "He's lying! I didn't touch Wilcox!" But Grayson was already motioning to the constable. "Lawrence Trent, you're under arrest for the murder of Dr. Henry Wilcox. Sir Reginald, you'll answer for aiding and abetting, and for the assault on Miss Ashford." As Trent was led away protesting, and Sir Reginald sat broken, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Mrs. Carver. The woman's silence throughout the confrontation was telling. She had known, or suspected, but chose to protect herself. The truth was out, but the cost was heavy. Chapter 15, The Reflection in the Light. The storm that had threatened Blackthorn Manor had broken, not in rain or thunder, but in the shattering revelations of the previous evening. Lawrence Trent was in custody, charged with the murder of Dr. Henry Wilcox, and Sir Reginald Ashford faced justice for his role in concealing the crime and attacking his own daughter, Clara. The household, once bound by secrets and suspicion, was now a fractured remnant, its inhabitants grappling with the truth laid bare. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the morning room with her knitting, felt the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved, yet her heart was heavy with the human cost of the tragedy. The morning was bright, the sun streaming through the tall windows, casting a golden glow over the manor's faded elegance. Lady Beatrice, pale but composed, joined Miss Marple for tea, her hands steady for the first time in days. "Jane," she said, her voice soft, "I cannot thank you enough. You've saved us from a darkness I helped create. If I had confronted Lawrence sooner, perhaps Dr. Wilcox would still be alive." Miss Marple's eyes were kind, though her tone was firm. "My dear Beatrice, guilt is a heavy burden, but you must not carry it alone. You trusted Mr. Trent as many would have. His charm was his weapon, and Dr. Wilcox's curiosity was his undoing, but you have acted bravely in the end, and that is what matters." Beatrice, Alf nodded, her eyes glistening. "And Clara? She's heartbroken about father. How could he do such a thing?" Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. Sir Reginald acted out of fear for Clara's future, misguided though it was. He believed the estate's ruin would destroy her prospects. In his way, he loved her. But love can lead to terrible choices when tangled with desperation. As they spoke, Inspector Grayson entered, his face weary but relieved. "Miss Marple," he said, "I owe you a great deal." Trent confessed, partially at least. He admits to striking Wilcox with a candlestick in a panic when the doctor confronted him about the embezzlement. Says it was an accident, but the evidence says otherwise. Sir Reginald's statement corroborates the cover-up. We've got enough to close the case. Miss Marple inclined her head. And Mrs. Carver, Inspector. Her silence was notable last night. Grayson's lips twitched. She's been questioned. She suspected Trent's fraud but kept quiet, hoping to leverage it for her own gain. No direct involvement in the murder, but she's not innocent of greed. Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions confirmed. And the candlestick, the window. The candlestick had Trent's fingerprints, buried under smudges, Grayson said. The polish we mentioned was a bluff, but it shook him. The window and scuff marks were Sir Reginald's work, as he admitted, to suggest an intruder. Clara's attack was his attempt to scare her into silence about the letter. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. It is always the small things, Inspector. The tobacco scent, the burned paper, the ledger page, that betray the truth. Human nature cannot help but leave its mark. Grayson smiled, a rare warmth in his expression. You've a gift, Miss Marple. If you ever tire of St. Mary Mead, the constabulary could use you. Miss Marple chuckled softly. I'm quite content with my garden and my knitting, Inspector, but I am glad to have been of service. That afternoon, Miss Marple took a walk in the Manor's gardens, the air fresh with the scent of damp earth and roses. Clara joined her, her face pale, but her eyes clearer than before. Miss Marple, she said, I don't know how to go on. Father, Mr. Trent, it's all so much. Miss Marple paused by a rose bush, her fingers brushing a petal. My dear Clara, you are stronger than you know. You trusted Dr. Wilcox, and you kept his letter safe, even in fear. That took courage. The future will be hard, but you have truth on your side, and that is a powerful ally. Clara managed a small smile. You sound like Dr. Wilcox. He always said to follow my heart. And so you should, Miss Marple said, but let your heart be guided by wisdom, not fear. As evening approached, Miss Marple prepared to depart. Her valise was packed, her notebook filled with the case's details, a record of human folly and her own quiet triumph. She stood in the great hall, bidding farewell to Beatrice, who clasped her hands warmly. You've given us back our peace, Jane, Beatrice said. I shall never forget it. Miss Marple smiled. Peace is a fragile thing, Beatrice. Guard it well and trust carefully. The train back to St. Mary Mead was waiting, and as Miss Marple settled into her seat, the countryside rolling past in a blur of green and gold, she reflected on the case. Blackthorn Manor has been a closed circle, its secrets hidden in plain sight, ink-stained fingers, a burned fragment, a whiff of tobacco, a father's desperate love. She had unravelled them not with force, but with patience, her little grey cells piecing together the truth as surely as her needles crafted a shawl. Back in her parlour, she would return to her quiet life, her garden, her neighbours' small dramas. But for now, as the train carried her home, Miss Marple allowed herself a moment of pride. The shadows of Blackthorn Manor had been banished, and the light of truth, however painful, had prevailed.